In this video, I'm going to cover how to produce movies using the CrystalGrower visualiser, like the one you can currently see on your screen. The movies generated with the visualiser generally consist of smaller movies stitched together into a larger piece. I'm going to show you how to record these individual pieces, along with showing some pre-programmed movies, and then I'll give some examples of how you can stitch these movies together. So the first thing I'm going to do is load a simulation which contains multiple simulation frames. You define your number of simulation frames when you're setting up your CrystalGrower simulation. So first I need to open my structure. So I'm going to do another MFI movie, which was the example shown at the beginning of this video. Then I need to load the coordinates. So this time I'm going to load quite a large simulation. So I'll load this one here, which is over 1 GB in size. So this is a huge simulation, so it might take quite a long time to load. Now that our simulation's loaded, we can turn on the overlay and we can see which frame is currently being displayed and the total number of frames. If I want to switch to the next frame, I can press the right arrow key. You can see we're switching between the frames. The frame number in the corner is incrementing. If we want to switch back, we can press the left arrow key. If you want to jump 10 frames forward, you can press the up arrow key. And if you want to jump 10 frames back, you can press the down arrow key. You can also skip to the first and last frame by pressing 1 on your keyboard to go to the first frame, or 0 on your keyboard to skip to the last frame. All the visualizer features shown in the previous video are available for multi-frame simulations as well. You could switch your simulation to display as points, same as you could in the previous video. This will allow you to manipulate your crystal a lot quicker and get it to the point where you want to capture your movie. So I can spin my crystal around really quickly, get to an angle that I like, get to a view position that I like, and then I can switch back to display as tiles. You can also load a state file, like we showed in the previous video, which can recolor and resize all the things that you want before you take your movie. Then the crystal will be displayed exactly how you want it to be. So I'm just going to show the pre-programmed movies quickly first. So if you go to the Render Movies tab, there's a few rotation movies that are programmed into the visualizer. These are all coded to the orthogonal axes. So you can take a quick movie of a crystal rotating around X, Y, Z, the XY, XZ, YZ, and XYZ axes. So I'll start with doing one just around Y. Then I can choose the location to save it. I've already made a folder here. I'm going to call this one Rotation Y. I'll open that folder and I'll just give it a name, MFI1. The visualizer will add a suffix to each of these pre-programmed movies telling you what it was. So this one will end up being called MFI1 Rotation Clockwise Y, or something similar to that. So if we go to the folder while these frames are being rendered, and I go to my rotation Y, you can see it's adding them 10 degrees at a time. It's rotating the crystal about the Y-axis, and then it's saving a frame. Once it's finished, it'll display a window to tell you that it's been completed, and you can press OK, and then you get access back to the visualizer. So now we have 37 frames from 0 to 360 degrees of a rotation around Y. So if I open this frame, and if I scroll through the pictures on Windows, you can see it's rotating around Y. And if you imagine stitching these together quickly, you could end up with a smooth movie of rotation about Y. The same thing would happen if you chose any of the other movies in the rotate clockwise or rotate anti-clockwise menu entries, but the behavior is slightly different for the flight path movies. So flight path movies allow you to program a path between 2 points in your simulation space, and then it'll generate a series of frames between those points to give you a smooth transition from the start point to the end point. So before we actually run a flight path movie, we have to define our start and end points. So these are done in the view window here. Set starting viewpoint and set ending viewpoint. but it helps to think about what you want to show in your movie first. So my crystal started at frame 1 in the default opening position. So if I switch back to frame 1 and I reset to my starting view, so I'm imagining the first two parts of my movie as we turn to an angle where we can see the growth happening clearly in the crystal, and then we want to actually see the growth happening. So this to me is a flight path transition followed by capturing all the frames of the simulation. This would give you a movie of rotating and translating to a nice viewpoint, and then a movie of the crystal growing. So I'm first going to turn off the overlay, and then I'm going to set this as my starting viewpoint. So I'll click View, Set Starting Viewpoint, and it'll confirm it's been selected. Then I'm going to rotate to a nice angle to view the crystal growth, and I can switch back to the final frame to check that it's all in frame. Zoom in a little bit closer, and I'll switch back to my first frame. Now I can set this as my ending viewpoint, and now we've got our 2 points which our movie is going to be taken between. So now we need to actually produce our movie, and we do this by clicking Render Movies in the menu. And I'll also just mention this checkbox here, Take Most Direct Path. So this will calculate the most direct path between your 2 points if this is enabled. So if you're doing a large rotation, it would actually take the quickest route to that point. So say you spun your crystal more than 180 degrees, it would actually rotate the opposite way around to make the rotation a bit shorter. If you don't want that to happen, then you can turn that option off. But it stops the crystal doing some unnecessary spins, which sometimes don't look right if you don't take enough frames. So I'm going to go to Flight Path, and then I can choose the order of the operations. So I can either choose to do rotation first followed by translation, or translation first followed by rotation, or I can choose to do both at the same time. Generally I pick the latter, as this looks a bit smoother, but it's up to you to choose which one suits your movie best. Then you can choose the number of frames. So more frames means a smoother transition, but it also takes up more space on your hard drive. Generally, if there's a larger change between your start and end point positions in your simulation space, then you should pick more frames. But as this one's quite small, we've only translated and rotated a small amount, so 30 frames will be enough. So I'll click 30 frames, and then I can choose where to save this. So I'm going to go into my Movies folder, and I'm going to make a new folder here, and I'm going to call this Full Movie. Then I'm going to go in this folder, and this is the first part of my movie. So I'll put a 1 in the title, so it'll come first in the folder. Then I'll give this a sensible name to remind me what it's showing. So I'll call this First Zoom, and then press Enter. It renders really quickly because we're only showing a small crystal on the screen. So if I go to my folder, Full Movie, you can see I've got 30 frames. And if I open this and scroll through them, it's a flight from our starting position. If I keep scrolling through, to our end position. So now we can think about our second part of our movie. So if I go back to the simulation, press OK on this dialog box, then another dialog box appears asking, do I want to set the ending viewpoint of my previous movie as the starting viewpoint for my next movie? So I built this function in to make it easier when you're chaining movies together so you don't lose track of where you were. Otherwise you have to record the whole movie from scratch. So if I just say yes now, it's going to replace our starting viewpoint with the position of our end viewpoint. So the next flight path movie I record is going to start from this position here. But we've said we don't want to record a flight path for the second part of our movie. We want to record the crystal growing. So the way we do that is by saving all the frames in the simulation. So that'll make the crystal look like it's growing over time if you scroll through those frames quickly. So if I go to File, Save All Frames, I can choose where I'm going to save all frames. So I'll save them in the same folder as the first part of my movie. And this one I'll give the prefix 2 underscore, so it'll come after part 1 in the folder. I'll call this one something like First Growth. Then it'll take a bit of time because it's rendering 50 frames, but if we go to our folder we can see this happening. You can see it's producing the frames one at a time. Once it's finished, it'll give you a dialog box saying all frames have been saved, and we'll have our 50 frames in the folder. So we've got the two first parts of our movie. Now we can start to think about what we want to see next. So in the example movie at the start of this video, I showed some internal defects. So let's try and look at those. So if I go back to my simulation, I know this is my starting viewpoint for my next flight path. So let's say I want to look down the 0, 1, 0 direction to try and spot the hourglass feature that you sometimes see in MFI crystals. I can simply rotate my simulation to look down the y-axis. It doesn't matter that I reset to my starting viewpoint to do this, because the movie function creates a movie between the 2 points, regardless of how you got to those points. It doesn't record your movements. So if I set this as my ending viewpoint, I can produce another flight path movie. So this will be translation rotation. I'll do 30 frames again. And this will be number 3. And I'll call this second zoom. And then I can save that. And then if I go to my folder, you can see it's doing the same thing again. And once it's completed, it asks me the same question again. Do I want to set the ending viewpoint as my starting viewpoint for my next movie? So I'll just check that the video has been recorded how I want it to be. And you can see it is. It ends in the point that I want it to. So I'll press yes to that. So let's say I wanted to look at something similar to the movie at the start of this video, where we investigate some internal defects. So the easiest way to look at internal defects with the visualizer is to switch to type tiles. And the same as what was shown in the last video, I can turn all the tiles off and then scroll through them one by one. So this one expresses the hourglass quite well. So it might make sense to pick this one. So let's say I wanted to watch the evolution of this hourglass across the simulation frames. I can do the same thing as I did to save the growth. I can save all frames. And I'll call this one part 4. So I'll put a 4 at the start of this one, and I'll call it second growth. I'll save some frames here. So if we scroll through these, we can see how the hourglass changes over the simulation. You can also use depth buffers to cut off the front and backs of the crystal if you want to look at internal defects. But we'll cover that in the internal defects video. And now we probably want to finish our movie by translating back to a nice viewpoint. So if we go back to the visualizer, change it back to our layer coloring and enable all the tiles again. And then let's switch to a different viewpoint. Something like that. And click set ending viewpoint. Then we can render our movie. Again, this will now be part 5, and this will be third zoom. So we'll have 5 parts to our movie that we can splice together. Just in case we want to create some more movies to add on to the end, we can set this as our starting viewpoint for our next movie again. So now we've got quite a decent amount of frames that we can splice together to make our movie. I'll first translate to our viewpoint, grow the crystal, part 2. Part 3, translate to our second viewpoint. Part 4, grow the crystal but showing the internal defects. We'll have to reverse these frames to make it look natural. So we'll go from the final frame of part 3 to the final frame of part 4. We'll dissolve the crystal a few frames, then grow the crystal back up to its full size. I do this quite a lot in my videos to show growth and dissolution on different facets. Then we'll get to our final translation to our last viewpoint. So now we need to splice all these frames together, so we need to use some video editing software. There are a lot of options available, and most of this comes down to preference. If you have access to paid software like Camtasia, this is very easy to do. And you also get access to a lot of extra functionality that's missing in free video editors. But the process is generally the same across all software. The original Windows Movie Maker is actually quite good for this as well, although that software is now depreciated. If you can get a copy of it, then that makes this process quite easy too. But there is a free video editor on Windows 10 as well, if you just type video editor into your search bar. So this is the one I'll use to show for an example. So I've just created a project and I'm going to call it MFI Movie. And the splicing process is pretty much the same thing across all video software. we're just bringing our frames together, putting them in order, and making their duration short enough that it looks like a smooth movie. Then we can go back in and change certain frames, making them a little bit longer to make it look a bit more professional. So to start, I need to add my pictures that I've produced with the visualizer to my project library. So I know part 1, part 2, and part 3 are all in sequence, so I can add all those in one go. It does take a bit of time to load, but once all your frames are loaded, it's quick to manipulate your video. And then our next part, we actually wanted to reverse the growth. So we want to load the frames in reverse order. So if I scroll down to part 4, I don't want to load these frames in this order. So I can just flip around the sorting. I can sort by descending and choose the end of part 4. And let's say I wanted to watch it go all the way down to its first frame. I can load all those. Again, I'll have to wait for it to load. And then we want to load part 4 again, but we want to play it in the right direction. We can add, we can flip the sorting around again to make it ascending. And we know that part 5 follows straight afterwards, and that's in the correct direction as well. So we'll just put all of part 4 and part 5 in one go. And once this loads, all our frames will be in the correct order. So now all our frames are loaded. We can scroll through and see that they're all in the project library. And the last ones we added are all selected. So if we want to add everything to the storyboard, which is where we're actually going to make our movie down the bottom here, we can click one file and press Ctrl A, and then press Place in the Storyboard. And it will add everything from the project library that's selected into the storyboard down here. So you can see this movie is going to be 12 minutes long, which is far longer than we want, because each frame has been assigned 3 seconds duration. So we want that a lot quicker, otherwise it's just going to be like watching a slideshow. So if you select one, press Ctrl A again, it'll select everything in the storyboard, and we can change the duration here. So let's put this way down. Let's put it 0.1 seconds. You can see our movie is now 24 seconds, which is more reasonable. So if we press play, we can actually watch this happen in real time. So we can see our first rotation, our growth, then we'll have our second rotation. Sometimes it lags a bit in the player, but once it's rendered, it'll run smoothly. You can see we've got our dissolution of the internal defects, the growth of the internal defects, and then it'll transition into our final rotation. So there was a few points in that movie where it would have benefited from being slowed down a bit to focus on certain points. And these tend to be parts where you switch between movie segments. So it makes sense to pause a little bit when you've just finished a growth to show the final crystal before you switch into your rotation. So what you can do is select specific frames and extend their lengths. For example, the final frame before it switches from internal defects back to tiles would make sense to extend that. So if I deselect everything, I can just click over here in the project library and it'll deselect everything on the storyboard. I'll skip right to the end. And I'll try and find the frame where it switches over from internal defects to tiles. So I know it's somewhere around here. There we go. That's the switching frame there. So we'll make that last a little bit longer for about 0.3 seconds. And then I'll also make the first frame showing the tiles last a bit longer too, so that'll also be 0.3 seconds. So now when it changes back to tiles, there's a slight pause, so it doesn't immediately jump straight in. Could actually benefit from a little bit longer, so I'll extend that even more. We'll make that an entire second. And we'll do the same here, make that an entire second. And now if we watch this transition here, it pauses slightly, then changes, then does the rotation. So it just looks a bit tidier. Now I'm just going to do that for the other parts of the video, and then I'm going to export my final video by pressing this Finish Video button here. And now we have our final movie. So you can see all the segments we had all put together. with some pauses added in for effect. The free video editor on Windows is slightly limited with regard to adding text overlays and annotations, but once you've created your movie, you can take it into other software and add those things on top. For example, Camtasia. In the next video, we'll go through using the high throughput sections of the visualizer to process lots of files at once,